In this video, we will go over how to draw trend lines on a trading chart. Drawing trend lines is harder than it looks, as you must choose the right touch points for the trend line to stay valid so you can use it in a trade setup or analysis. To become accurate in placing trend lines, it will take experience and practice. Once you can draw trend lines correctly, along with the other points in my video, how to trade crypto profitably, your trading will get much better as we use multiple tools to plan and make a trade. You can watch my analysis videos to see how I have used these tools on the charts of Bitcoin to help viewers see where price is going and what to do when it gets there. Using this list shown, we will now go through how to draw trend lines. Here we have a weekly chart where I have already placed several trend lines we will look at. You can see where I have identified the swing points by placing the trend line at the top of the highs of a trend in price, be it either a downtrend or an uptrend. We will go through different time frames and show how these weekly trend lines can be used on lower time frames also. All these charts I use are in log mode. Logarithmic chart trend lines may break sooner on uptrends or later on downtrends compared to linear chart trend lines, providing earlier warning signals of a potential change in momentum or trend. Here I show the difference of this trend line in log to linear mode. Now to examine why this trend line worked. You can see I used the wick before the actual top. The second point on the trend line would have to be done months later, as this is a weekly chart. This then gave us a heads up of when price broke out and retested it as shown. This next example we took from the top, and again months later you got the second touch point. When using these like this, you must be aware price can do what it did here, and after breakout it retests it. Then later price drops lower to retest the trend line again, much lower than initial breakout. This next example is a prime example of a failed trend line. This was the COVID crash, and once price broke back under it, the trend line is invalid. Each time we use the high of the move and the second touch point allows us to see when a trend is broken, as seen here. The recent top of Bitcoin had a trend line also, but the touch points lined up much better when looking at the daily chart. Here we see the touch points and how they can have wicks outside the trend line, and even a body or two of a candle is okay. This trend line would have been drawn after these second, third, and fourth touch points lined up. Here is the current daily trend line for Bitcoin, so we can see later how it fares when price touches it again. Notice how I took the first candle on the second touch point area and not the high of that area. This is a technique you can use by checking further down the trend line if it lines up nicely with more touch points. This trend line lined up well on multiple time frames, giving better entry points on breakout for a trade. Cycle through time frames when doing a trend line to help identify better touch points. Same as this bottom trend line, lines up well on daily, but not so much on the weekly. Notice again, I use the wick just before the low. You can do this more often when there are large wicks after where you place the trend line. Let's see the trend line if we use different touch points. As you can see, it never touched the trend line again using this way. Even if you moved touch point 2 to the next candle, this trend line would not have given you any information later. Here we put the trend line from top of wick to touch point 2 being top of wick also. As you can see, finding the correct touch points is crucial to having the trend line stay valid longer. As we can see, not all trend line breaks work out. Shown here, this trend line break was in a bear market, so price went down further after the break of trend line. Now a look at 4-hour time frame trend lines. We see this trend line has the 4-hour candles penetrate through it. Compare it to the daily chart, and we see even though the trend line is valid, it is not really the correct one to use. We add this trend line as shown using a different second touch point, and it lines up much better. You could use both with the outer trend line the max point price could get to. Now look at this new trend line on the 4-hour chart. See the difference? The first touch point is out of position, as you can see. We adjust it to the 4-hour top first touch point. I would use both these with the inner as the main trend line and the outer one as the max point, should the first trend line break. This trend line was perfect. It lined up on multiple time frames as seen before in this video. As you can see on lower time frames, candles can cut through the trend line, as long as there are not multiple candles in a row. Usually when this happens, the next move is large and fast. Look how this trend line alerted us to the breakout and retest of the trend line, giving multiple chances to enter the long trade of the breakout. This bottom trend line, however, had multiple candles break the trend line, but when using the daily chart it helped to get a long entry later, when price crashed through it with a large wick. Therefore, this trend line was valid even though it broke some rules. This trend line worked beautifully with perfect touch points, again showing us the breakout point to enter a long. Now let me show you some trend lines I will draw on a blank chart. I take the low point of this price action and line up with the next low point. This is easier to do when using the magnet option. This type of trend line and price action is a very common pattern for Bitcoin. Price drops under it, retests the trend line, then drops lower. This is not a great trend line as it is too steep. Avoid using steep angles on trend lines. Here we use the second touch point, and it shows later wicks penetrate the trend line. When we get more information, we can move the trend line to a much nicer touch point, giving precise touches. You could have moved this once this new touch point came on the chart. You can see that later it helped pinpoint the next touch points. So now you have seen how to draw trend lines, what the different types of trend lines are, and how they work on multiple time frames, and how some do not. You have seen what happens when you put trend lines through candle bodies, and also you saw examples of trend lines mostly using swing high or low points as the first touch point. Remember to avoid steep angles on trend lines and to use them on a log mode chart. Use these trend lines you draw in tandem with other tools or indicators to get better accuracy with your trading. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you.